Hi there, Sandra here from the Schwowin's Nest. Welcome to Christmas in July. My second project is using these corks. They were graciously donated to me by members of my family, Chelsea and Andrew, who are also the owners of the Happy Dog Homestead blog and the Happy Dog Homestead on Instagram. I'll have their contact down in my description box, so please go take a look at what they're doing. They have some beautiful dogs and they have some wonderful adventures that they can tell you all about. So as you can see, I am building a Christmas tree using the corks. They take a lot of hot glue and you've got to have some patience and some time because the hot glue takes a little bit longer to dry on the corks. I think just because of the material they are. But once you get to this third layer where you can kind of have the cork sitting on top of the other corks, it works out a little bit easier and goes a touch faster. So each time I go in about 1/4 of an inch or so because I want to build that tree from larger at the bottom to smaller at the top. So once I get to the third and fourth layer, some of the corks are going to be starting to go on a downward angle. And this is because the thickness of the corks is much bigger and I have to adjust for that. So I'm not able to put as many corks in a row as I was for the first and second row. You can also see that I'm trimming some of those corks down to make them a little bit shorter so I can fit things in better. So I'm almost at the top and you can see that I've only got about 4 or 5 corks on each layer at this point. I'm going to be needing to trim some down, make them a little shorter, and then I'm also going to be trimming some and filling in the gaps all the way around the tree. So all along, I've been using my miter shears to cut the corks, and even though they're not softened and they're just the original what they are, look at how it goes through just like butter. It's awesome. So if you don't have these miter shears, they are linked down in my description box. You got to get yourself a pair. So trimming this on an angle is going to help me kind of fit those corks in a little bit better. For the peak at the top of the tree, I took 2 corks and I cut them at a 45-degree angle and glued them together, and now I'm just going to hot glue that right on top of the tree. To attach a base to the tree, I glued a wood slice right inside the bottom layer, and then I'm going to hot glue another stack of 3 slices right on top. I am super happy with how this tree turned out. My last project for you today is using this wood sign that I did last year. It didn't sell, so I'm going to repurpose it for a new sign this year. The first thing I'm going to do is just paint it black with just regular black acrylic paint. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to paint it white again. But because there's already some black print on it, it's not going to cover very well with the white. So I always do a coat of black first and then go over it again with white. Now I'm going to take these mason jar lids. They are zinc and of course they were from a thrift store. I think it was 20 in a bag for $2. Taking my miter shears, I'm just going to give this a good squeeze, and you can see that it does bend pretty nicely. It's not going to cut all the way through, but what I need to do is just wiggle the lid back and forth, and then it just will pop off. The first cut is the hardest, but the second and third cuts are pretty easily because you can grab the end of that lid and just wiggle it off. I had to figure out a way how to glue these together and then also glue them onto the board. Hot glue doesn't work very well, so I'm using my Starbond medium thickness glue and the Accelerator. I'm using some white pipe cleaners or chenille stems, if that's what you want to call them, and I'm gluing that onto the ridge on the inside of the lid. Then I'll spray it with the Accelerator to make it dry really fast. I'm going to continue that process until I get the rows that I need. I'm going to start with 4 pieces at the bottom, 3, 2, 1, and just work my way up so I have the shape of a tree. You can see I have the shape of a tree at the top there, but I'm going to be working on this board now. I just need to give it a couple of coats of chalk paint in linen white. I wanted the tree to have a wood base, so I found this really thin piece of scrap wood, and I'm just going to hot glue that right onto the sign. I'm going to be placing the hot glue right where the chenille stem hits the sign, and that's going to make sure that everything stays glued in place. I decided that I still wanted to add little pops of green, so I'm adding a little pine pick to the very top of the tree, and that will become my tree topper. And then I'm also going to trim some of the little pine branches and glue them on the exterior of the tree, make it look like it has some real branches. To make this sign look a little bit aged, I'm just using some black on a chippy brush, and I'm going to dry brush right onto the white, and I'm also going to add a little bit more dimension to the frame and dry brush some black on that as well. I'm adding a hanger to the back. These are called sawtooth hangers, and the reason I like them is because they're self-leveling and they're super easy to install. They come with these tiny little nails, and all you have to do is tack those in place. The nails for these are super tiny, so I always use my needle nose pliers to hang on to them. Otherwise, I'd be banging my thumb all to bits. My first project is using these wood planks that you can get from the Dollar Tree. There are 6 in a pack. You can get square ones and you can get these rectangular ones. I'm also going to be using some of these coffee stir sticks to create a pallet sign. I'm going to glue about 5 of the stir sticks across the back of the project to hold the planks in place. Once I've got this completed, I'm going to give it a couple of coats of linen white chalk paint. Next, I'm going to take these little wood cutout ornaments and I'm going to just slice off that star on the top because although these are Christmas trees, I just want them to be regular pine trees. So it's just really simple to score those off with my utility knife. Then I'm going to stain them with a mixture of burnt umber and black and a little bit of water. To get a nice arc shape for the words I want to put on, I took a piece of black cardstock, I folded it in half, and then just cut out an arc. And when I folded it open again, I had a full-size arc, and this is going to allow me to put the letters the way I want them to be. I'm going to just pencil in Christmas tree at the top. Normally, I'd be using my Craft Smart paint pen in black, but I didn't have that right now because it's run dry. And I didn't have a chance to go out and get some more. So I'm just going to use this permanent marker and trace out my letters. I'm going to put the word farm in larger letters right underneath in the center. And you can see here that I have now switched out to just a regular Sharpie marker because I was really struggling trying to find one that would not dry up because of the chalk paint. I do find that using regular markers on top of chalk paint tend to dry out really quickly. I don't know if it's because of the texture of the paint, because it's a really matte finish, but all of the tips end up getting clogged with paint and then I don't have any ink coming out. So that's a frustration for me. That is why I have always used my Craft Smart paint pens because they don't fail me. I just did my own little take on different types of fonts, added some little edges that would be sticking out, and now I'm taking a fine point marker and drawing out a shadow line. I didn't want to use hot glue on these little trees because they have little cutout circles in them, and I didn't want the hot glue to seep through, so I'm going to use my medium thickness Starbond glue. I've been using Starbond glues for a little bit now. I got a box of them sent to me from the Starbond company, and I really like their glues. They have a different assortment. I think I got about 6 in the box. This medium thickness glue is a nice one because it has a little bit of working time, but you don't need a lot. You can see that I only put a few little dots on it, and it's going to stick down really nicely. Takes about a minute or so for it to fully dry. This also comes with a spray accelerator, so if you need something to dry lickety-split, you can go ahead and put that glue on, spray the other side of the project, and then put the two pieces together and it will be an instant hold. I'm using a super fine tip marker to write the words pine, spruce, and fir on the bottom of the Christmas trees. This is just a dollar store fine point marker, and I found this in the office supply section. It works really, really well. I'm using my almost empty Craft Smart paint pen and my ruler to draw an arrow down at the bottom of the sign. I ended up having to switch over to the fine tip marker just to complete the outline of the arrow, and then I was going to just fill it in with black. And finally, I'm just going to take my chippy brush with some black paint. I'm going to distress it just by dry brushing across and making sure I do a little bit of extra along the edges. I want this sign to be freestanding, so I've taken some of these blocks that you can get at the Dollar Tree in their Crafter's Square, and again I'm taking my watered down burnt umber and black stain or acrylic paint stain, whatever you want to call it, a wash maybe, and I'm going to go ahead and stain about 8 of these. I'm going to need 4 for the bottom, and then I want to embellish the top with 2 of them as well. I'm using hot glue to attach the cubes, and I'm making sure that the cube sticks out a little bit on the side and at the top. So I'm really only gluing on maybe about half of the cube onto the palette. To finish off the sign, because it will be standing up, I'm going to paint the back with just some acrylic white paint, and that will just finish it off and give it more of a professional look. This last project turned out super sweet. I was really excited to make it, and I was really flabbergasted at how well it turned out. I didn't really think it was going to turn out this good. Anyhow, I am taking this Dollar Tree calendar and I'm going to totally make it over into something completely different. I'm going to just remove the blocks because I don't need those right now, and then I'm also going to remove the little box from the backing house. The first thing I'm going to do is use these large popsicle sticks to create a backing for the little box. So I'm just going to mark off with pencil what I need to cut, and then use my miter shears to cut them down and then glue them right on top. Then I used one of those other planks from the Dollar Tree and glued the box right on it. Now what I'm doing is creating a barn out of this house. So I'm going to use my miter shears the best way I can and trim off the chimney and trim off a little bit of the peak so it looks more like a barn. Using Deco Art chalk paint in the color Romance, I'm going to give the barn a couple of coats of red front and back and the sides too. I also then painted the box and the popsicle sticks with white. You can see that I also painted the plank white, and now I'm going to take those Dollar Tree cubes from Crafter's Square and paint those white. These are going to be little legs for the plank. I'm just going to use hot glue to glue the cubes onto the bottom of the plank. Now it's time to make a barn door. I'm using these little coffee stir sticks. These were, I think, a Dollarama purchase, and so they're really thin, really easy to cut. And now I'm just going to take some measurements and do 2 side panels and 2 cross panels, and then I'm going to make the X in between. This is where it comes in handy to have these miter shears, because I can just adjust the angle for what I need and then cut it accordingly. So right now I have it set at, I think I have it at 90. I'm changing it down to 45. That ends up being too angled, so then I move it back up to 60, and that turns out to be the perfect angle. Now that I've got all my door pieces, I'm going to go ahead and glue them into place just using some hot glue. So here you can see that I have made some little roof pieces as well. I do apologize, I forgot to hit the record button when I was doing that. But now I also want to add a little bit of a roof line to it. And again, just using my miter shears and measuring as I go. And then I'll just use hot glue to attach that as well. I'm going to glue on these other little pieces just to make the roof look more finished. This is a pretty tall barn, so I'm going to give it a little bit of extra support. I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of these stir sticks and add a piece across from roof edge to roof edge, because that's usually what barns look like. To give the wood more of a rustic look, I'm just going to dry brush some of my burnt umber and black mixed together paint, and I'm going to do that for all of the wood. To add some more detail and make this really look like a barn, I'm going to use my pencil and a ruler and just draw in some vertical lines to make it look like it's got barn board. In order to get that flat piece of barn standing straight up, I'm using a couple more of the little blocks, and those are just going to be little supports for the barn. So I'm just going to glue them onto the back side of the plank. With some hot glue, I'm going to put it on the two little blocks and then lay down the barn right on top. Now it's time to add all of the little details. I've got a few different sizes of bottle brush trees, and I'm going to hot glue them right down onto the plank. I also decided to take that cube and paint it red. I had tried to distress it with the brown, making it look like wood, but I just really didn't like that next to the barn. I needed it to be red so they would match, so I gave it a couple of coats. Then I took some more of the little coffee stir sticks and I made a frame for around the front of the box, staining it with the same color. I added a little wood popsicle stick sign that said Happy Holidays over the barn door, and I made a similar one saying Tree Farm that I glued right on top of the box. This next step, I think, is what brought it all together. I have this little white picket fence, which was something that I grabbed at Michael's a while ago. I think maybe even over a year. It's just been in my stash. It's wired so you can bend it, and I'm just going to put it around the back and the sides of this little plank and hot glue it into place. Now I'm taking a little piece of garland from the Dollar Tree and I'm going to trim it down really nice and short. This is going to become a tiny little wreath that I'm going to glue on top of the barn. So I want to make sure there aren't any long pieces. They're really easy to bend. I'm just going to twist it into a circle and then hot glue it in place. I'm also going to add a little piece of greenery to the top of the Tree Farm sign. So this is where it gets fun. I took some Mod Podge and some baby powder, which is talc or whatever you have on hand. I mixed it together to form a paste, and I was able to take this and spoon it onto the white plank to mimic snow piles. And this turned out so cute. It was just something that I thought of. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I thought I would give it a shot. And then I ended up adding some Epsom salts on top, putting some on the little trees, on the roof line, on some of the greenery, and it was just adorable. This box is something that I had thrifted a while ago. It's already gotten a coat of paint for a different project, so I'm going to repurpose it for this one. I just need to remove the latch. I'm going to sand down the wood where the latch was just to make an even surface. This paint that I'm using is just an eggshell paint that can be used anywhere in your home. It was a mist tint that I picked up at the hardware store, and it's kind of a taupey gray color. It's fairly dark, but I thought it would be a really nice base coat for a wood texture. So I'm going to give this whole box one coat. I needed to add something inside the box to make it higher. So this is just a cardboard box that I had laying around. I cut it to size and now I'm going to hot glue it to the bottom of the box. Instead of painting this, I'm going to just fold up a piece of paper a couple of times over and then cut it to fit and glue that right on top of the cardboard. I also put a bead of hot glue between the paper and the box just to hold it in place better. Now I'm going to work with these little pieces of scrap wood, and I'm just going to glue the triangle pieces onto the rectangle pieces and make little wood houses. With a dry brush and some burnt umber acrylic paint, I'm going to go around the edges like this and make it look like wood grain. Once the brown is dry, I'm going to start doing the same thing with black. A dry brush, actually I'm using the same brush, and I'm just going to make it look more distressed and old and weathered. I'm making a little bottle brush village, and what I've done here is just put all of the bottle brush trees in there to plan how I want it to look. Then I decided that I wanted to raise the houses, make them just a little bit taller, so I'm using a tumbling tower block and I'm going to glue that onto the bottom of each of the houses. Then I'm just going to use hot glue to glue the house in place. I'll repeat the same thing for the second one. Then I'm just going to start hot gluing the trees onto the paper. I've left the plan in place and I'm just going to pick up each tree individually, add some hot glue to the bottom and stick it down. I've got a whole big box of bottle brush trees from last year and from this year, but I came across these little birch branches that were really sweet. I think I picked these up at my Dollarama last year for a buck 25, I think for two. And I'm just going to be pulling apart the branches to make it look more like a natural tree. I decided to add a couple at the back and one in the front. Then I started putting the little bottle brush trees in, and this kind of changed a little bit. I just wanted them in the front a little bit, but I also used them around the sides and the back for some fillers. For a final touch, I'm going to use some Epsom salts and put them in where there's all the white space to cover up the paper and to give it a little bit more of a Christmas snowy look. There really isn't an easy way to glue down these Epsom salts. I didn't want them to lose their sparkle, so I will probably take the salt out once I go to store it after the holidays. Here's how my little box Christmas village looks. My next project for you is using all dollar store products. I have three Dollar Tree Christmas trees, and this is a wood look pot that I picked up at Dollarama in the summertime and never used it. So I thought it would be the perfect addition for this tree. So I am sure everyone is familiar with these little Dollar Tree trees. They are worth $1 because they're very sparse, but if you do a little magic with them, you can make them look better. So what I'm doing is opening up the tree and I'm going to just open it up one side. So I'm going to leave the back side flat and I'm just going to open up all of the branches and I'll do that for two of them. What I'm going to do now is put them together back to back so the both flat sides will meet in the center. And I'm just going to use some small black zip ties or cable ties to hold them together. I'm going to add one at the bottom and one towards the top. I've taken out the third tree and I've fluffed it all the way around. Now I'm going to zip tie that onto the first bunch of trees about a third of the way down. These zip ties are on the shorter side, so I just put two of them together and that will do the trick. Then I'm going to end up with a 2.5-foot tree. This is what the tree looks like. Now it is out of shape because I've got the bottom fluffed and then it goes narrow. And then I've got bigger branches from the bottom of the third tree and then going narrow again. Well, I'm going to give you a trick to fix that. So what I'm doing here is fluffing it out as best I can. And please excuse the craft space behind the tree. This is what some of my craft room looks like. And if you're a fellow crafter, you probably have the same kind of thing happening in your home. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a crafter. I've got a piece of floral foam glued to the bottom of the container, and now I'm just going to push the tree right down into it. So here's another Dollar Tree product that I'm sure everyone is familiar with. It's those wired garland ties. I've got a pack here. I think there are 12 or 15 in a pack. What I'm going to do is just kind of run my fingers around it to fluff up the branches a little bit better. And then I'm going to cut it into 3 different pieces. Real Christmas trees don't have single branches coming out from the trunk of the tree. So what I'm going to do to the majority of these branches is take the pieces that I've cut, wrap them around the individual branches about halfway down, and then it will become a branch with 3 stems on it instead of 1 stem. This is going to make the tree look so much more high end and realistic. So I'm going to continue to do that and fill out the tree. That third tree on the top needs a haircut. So you can see that I've already trimmed one side of it, and I'm going to go ahead and trim the other side because I want this to be a taller, narrower tree. I don't need all of these branches sticking out so far from the original trunk. You can see it's already starting to look better. What I'm going to do with those little bits that I cut off is use some hot glue and glue them in towards the stem to give the trunk and the center of the tree a little bit more fullness. Okay, now check this out. This is 3 Dollar Tree trees. And look at how beautiful it's turned out. Oh, plus a package of the garland ties. It looks beautiful. So what I'm going to do now is just decorate it with some fillers and a little bit of white berries and some pine cones. I want this tree to be more natural and rustic. I'm not gluing any of these pieces into the tree because I'm probably going to do a little bit of a different theme with it next year. So I want to be able to just pull everything off at the end of the season. I'm also now going to take it outside and give it a spray of snow. The last project that I have today is using this rustic wood frame that I built out of some scrap pallet wood and some thin MDF, and I put the frames together all at once a couple of weeks ago when the weather was still really nice and I was able to get outside and use my table saw. I'm going to paint the interior of the sign, so the panel, with a couple of coats of Rust-Oleum Linen White chalk paint. I'm using a bit of black in with this beautiful green color to make a really deep, dark green. I want my Christmas tree sign to not be the traditional farmhouse black and white sign. I'm thinking that a little bit of green might look really nice. Instead of stenciling in the design, I'm going to use my dry brush and I'm going to do a dry brush technique with all of these trees. This is something that I kind of stumbled upon a while back, and I really love the effect of this. I think a solid tree looks nice too, but I'm just loving this type of texture that I'm getting from the dry brushing. As I was filming this reveal, I realized that I haven't done a big reveal like this in a really long time. So, ta-da! There are my 3 beautiful Christmas trees. The touch of green, I think, is just perfect. There were a couple of areas that got a little bit of a thicker color, so I decided just to go in with my little paintbrush here and just add a little bit more dimension to the trees. The other thing that I decided to do was take a little bit of black on a small dry brush and just add a little bit more dimension to the trunk at the bottom of each of the trees. A few weeks ago, I was at the Dollar Tree and they had these beautiful lettering stencils, these alphabet stencils. They are super high quality. The stencil itself is really nice and thick. I like to cut my stencils apart into the strips because they're easier to manage. You can leave them whole if you want, but when I'm working with smaller dimensions and I need to get inside, I would rather have them separate. So I'm going to be just stenciling on with a makeup sponge and some black paint. And of course, keeping with farmhouse tradition, I'm going to use the words farm fresh at the top, and then I'm going to put something a little bit different down at the bottom. I've also got a makeup sponge tip for you. The ones I'm using here are very soft. They're not the ones I had previously. This is a new bag that I bought and they're really, really soft. You really have to use a lot of pressure to get the color to go on. So I'm going to be tossing these and I'm going to be looking for some firmer ones. So just make sure that they are a really nice firm sponge and not anything too squishy. Down at the bottom, I'm using my pencil to write out the words pine, spruce, and fir. Now I'm just going to trace over the letters using my favorite scrapbooking marker, which is really old. I've had it for a very long time, but it has stood the test of time. It still has tons of ink in it. And I like to use this instead of my Craft Smart oil-based markers when I'm doing more of a fine line font. Using my ruler, I'm just going to mark some long lines in between the words. I'm using the fine tip end of the same marker, and I like to draw shadow lines on my fonts. This makes them look more finished and more professional. The last thing I'm going to do for this sign is add some grain sack striping to both ends. There's a little bit too much white space, so I needed to add something in. I'm starting about a half an inch in, and I'm just going to do one of the thick marker lines all the way down. Then I'm going to move in about another quarter of an inch and do another set of lines, which will be the thicker stripe. And then I'll do another thin stripe on the opposite side. One thing that I like to do when I'm using markers and a ruler is every time I pick it up, I wipe off the ink. There's always a little bit of ink left over, and when I'm working on a white space, I don't want any of that ink to transfer and make a mess. Finally, I wanted to add some greenery. I have these picks that I got in a bag from Amazon, and they will be linked down in my description box. And I've also got a few of the Dollar Tree pine cones. I'm just going to use some hot glue and attach those to the top of the frame. I just love how this sign turned out, and I've got it hanging in my living room.
I
I
love
hope
going thrifting for different pieces. This is a teapot that was missing its lid. It was $2 at the thrift store. So what I'm going to do first is use some 100% acetone to clean it all up. That's going to get rid of all of the stains in this little spout. It's going to get all of the glue off from the sticker, and it's just going to clean it up really nice, and it dries really fast as well. Next, I'm going to give it a good coat of this Rust-Oleum matte clear finish. This is a shiny teapot, and you can see here now that it's been sprayed, it's nice and matte, and that's really going to help my paint stick to my project. I'm using a super soft brush that's going to help eliminate any of the brush strokes. I'm also just going to use my own DIY chalk paint, and if you're interested in that recipe, it's down at the bottom of my description box. I ended up doing 3 coats for this teapot. While the teapot dries, it's time to work on what's going to go inside it. I'm just using a dry brush method with my burnt umber paint, and this is just a dowel that I found in my stash. I think this is a 1/2 inch dowel, so it's going to be nice and sturdy. I'm just going to continue to use my dry brushing until I get almost all of the dowel covered. I found this little foam box in my stash, and that's the perfect size for me to just pop the dowel in. It's not really sturdy, so I'm probably going to add a little bit of hot glue, which of course is going to melt the styrofoam. So later on when I'm finished my project, I'm going to add some of my weld bond glue to give it a permanent hold inside the box. I decided to build my own little Christmas tree using these pine picks that came from Amazon, and I have the link down in my description box. I'm not sure if they're still available at this time. The other greenery that I'm going to use is just this fern that I bought a ton of in the springtime because I just thought it was so pretty. But I think it's also going to add a little bit of texture and dimension to this tree. So I'm going to start by taking these picks, using the wire and wrapping it around the dowel, and then using some hot glue to keep it in place. I'm going to do that for 5 of the picks on one layer, and then I'm going to start adding the fern. It's really important to make sure that you tie it as tight as you can with the wire, but then also with the hot glue, don't do anything until it sets. I spent a lot of time just waiting for the hot glue to dry before I moved on to my next piece. I'm starting with the fern at the bottom and I'm leaving it on the stem, meaning that there's 3 little sprigs to one stem, but I've pulled it off the main stem. Now I'm just going to use hot glue and glue them onto the dowel rod a little bit and on top of the pine that's already there. That's going to make it nice and secure. Now I'm going to do another layer of the pine stems and then another layer of the fern, and I'm just going to keep working my way up to the top of the tree. And as I get up to the top of the tree, I make my stems a little bit shorter. So I trim some of the pine and I trim some of the fern and just make sure that it has a beautiful Christmas tree shape. Again, using the same process with the wire and then hot glue. At this point, I'm about halfway up my dowel, and you can see here that I just have my layers, and I'm also just going to fill in any holes using some of the fern and using some of the pine pieces, just to make sure that I don't have any holes. As I said earlier, when I got to the top of the tree, I started creating little shorter stems, and that just meant cutting the ends off because the front part of the stem is always prettier than the back part. In regards to the pine picks, I did not use the wire at this point anymore. I just used hot glue and glued it right to the dowel. My tree is totally done. I just love how it turned out. And now I'm going to add some snow. So what I'm doing is taking one of the Dollar Tree stencil brushes and I'm dipping it into my chalk paint. And I'm using a technique that I figured out on my own. I'm just pushing the paintbrush right into the stems. And what happens is the tips of them get really nice and full with snow, and then you can just work your way down the bottom of each of the stems. Now, this is going to also take me a little bit of time, so I'm going to speed up the process for you so you can see how it turns out.
So this is the next day for my teapot. I wanted to make sure it was really nice and dry, and I've got 3 coats on it. This is a printable that I created using Google Drawing. Of course, it will be available as a free printable on my website. If you're not familiar with how to get onto my website, there are some instructions down in my description box. What I'm going to do is print this out on tissue paper, and I'm going to do that 2 times. So what I'm doing now is just cutting it out. Sorry, you can't really see it, but I'm going to just trim off the edges now of the tissue paper and get it as close to my design as possible. I'm going to use Mod Podge to apply the tissue paper transfer, and I'm going to give the teapot a good amount. I don't want it really thick, but I want all of the areas that is going to have the tissue paper nicely wet with the Mod Podge. But it's okay if you miss a little bit on the outsides. It's really easy to just lift up the tissue paper and put some more on top. I'm going to lay the tissue paper printable right on top of the Mod Podge, smoothing it out really gently with my fingers, as you can see me doing here. And then I'm going to take my brush that always is going to have a little bit of Mod Podge on it. It has to be wet, otherwise you're going to tear the tissue paper. And then I'm just going to put another layer of Mod Podge on top. If there's any wrinkles, I just use a technique that I figured out. I take my brush with a tiny little bit of Mod Podge on it, and I pounce it up and down right on top of the wrinkle or the bubble, and it just pushes it right into the surface of the paint. I'm going to push that tissue paper right over the edge and into the inside of the teapot, and I'll also do the same thing at the bottom. Once I was done this and it was all dry, I did the same thing on the other side. I just used a little bit of hot glue on the bottom of the box of the Christmas tree and glued it in place. And I think this is gorgeous. This next project is an inspiration from some other channels. I've been seeing bottle brush trees on spindle pieces and I just couldn't resist. I had to do one for myself. So I've got 2 of these spindle pieces that I have in my stash. I'm going to give both of them a few coats of white chalk paint to start. Once they were completely dry, I took my sanding block and I started to distress all of the raised edges. I did a little bit of sanding in between as well, just to make it look like it was worn and weathered. This green snowy bottle brush tree is from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to leave the bottom wood piece on. It fits perfectly on this smaller spindle, and I'm just using hot glue to attach them. The larger tree didn't have a bottom on it anymore, although I would have cut it off because it was like this mound of snow. And I'm just using a wheel here. I'm going to put some hot glue in the center of the bottle brush tree. I'm pulling down all of the branches, and then I'm just going to go ahead and push that right on top of the metal pieces and glue it in place. This made it really easy to glue the tree onto the spindle, and there was a little bit, of course, of the wood showing, so I decided to use some red ribbon to cover that up. These are beautiful. I am in love. This last project is a true trash to treasure. I have these wooden boards that I picked up off the street in the summertime when a neighbor was redoing their deck. And I just cut them into the same length. I think this is probably about 14 inches. And then I'm going to use my drill and some screws to put them together and create a box for my Christmas tree. I like to start my screws first before I actually start putting things together. And I do struggle a little bit hanging on to things and drilling at the same time. So if you do as well, get somebody to help you. It's so much easier. But anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and put these all together, and then I'm going to give it one rough coat of white chalk paint. While I waited for the paint to dry, I went to my Cricut and I designed a decal, of course, which will be available on my website as a decal, but it will also be available as a free printable. Check out that down in my description box. I did make this a little too big, so if I had to do it again, I would probably shrink these words just a little wee bit, but I still think it turned out absolutely gorgeous, and here's how it looks with my Christmas tree. This first project is using some of these Dollar Tree wood trees that I found this year. I was so excited when I did find them. They're a little rough around the edges, so I'm going to take off the tags and then give them a little bit of sanding with some fine grit sandpaper just to clean them up. The trees aren't straight at the bottom, so I am going to take my little hacksaw and just cut them so they are flat across because I will be trying to stand these up. The next thing I'm going to do is start painting them around the edges, and I'm going to start by painting the bottom edge with some red chalk paint. This chalk paint is from Deco Art. I get it at Michael's, and it's super thick and only requires one coat. Once I get all around the outside edge, I'm going to paint just the back of the tree. I'll do the same thing with the other two trees, except I'm just going to switch out my colors. So for this one, I'm doing sort of a mossy green color, and for the third one, I'm going to use burnt umber. Once the backs were dry, I flipped it over and I'm going to paint all three of them white on the top, but I'm not going to go over any of the edges. I'm going to make sure that I just do the very top flat portion of the trees in white. And they took a couple of coats to cover because I wanted the white to be nice and crisp. I've got a garland tie from the Dollar Tree. They come in a pack of 12, and I'm going to just give it a little bit of a haircut. I don't like it when the needles are that long, especially when I'm trying to create something in miniature form. It just looks a lot nicer when they're cut down. I'm going to bend part of this garland into a circle because I want to create a little miniature wreath for on top of one of the trees. So once I get the size that I like, I'm just going to take my snips and cut the rest off. Before I can start attaching things to my trees, I want to distress them. I'm using one of these wide little chip brushes, and I've got it dipped in some black paint, and I'm basically just dry brushing a little bit around the edges of the tree. I'm just coming in from the outside to make sure that I don't get anything on the natural wood part. Then I'm going to drag the chip brush very lightly across the tree, going in a vertical fashion as you see me doing here. And again, very lightly. I don't want any really dark lines on this. I just want it very lightly distressed. And I'm going to do this for all three of the trees. Using hot glue, I'm going to glue the two ends of the little mini wreath together and just hold them until the glue sets. I did end up making it a touch tinier than originally planned because I wanted it to not look too oversized on this little mini tree. I also created a simple little shoestring bow from some red and white gingham ribbon that also came from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to glue that right on top of the little wreath. I'm going to hot glue the wreath right on top of the first Christmas tree, and this is the one with the red background. For the brown tree, I've got some little mini hemlock pine cones that I picked up at my cottage last year, and I had a bunch left over. I'm just putting them in sort of a wreath arrangement, and I'm going to hot glue them into place. I know the Dollar Tree carries some mini pine cones, and sometimes you can find some little ones like this in the pack. But if you're looking specifically for these teeny tiny ones, I do have a link for hemlock pine cones down in my description box, but I can't guarantee that they're still available. I wanted to give this little pine cone wreath a gingham bow as well, and I wanted to use black and white, but I didn't have any of the real thin stuff. So I'm just using my hot glue gun and I'm taking the thicker stuff. I think it's about an inch or 3/4 of an inch wide, and I'm just gluing it in half. And then I'll make a little shoestring bow for this wreath too. The tree with the green background is going to get a little red pipberry wreath. I'm going to start by just doing one wreath circle, and then I'm going to add some additional pipberries on the outside of the circle just to make it look a little bit more substantial. This one's going to get a chenille stem bow in the color of green, and I think this trio turned out really cute. Now, the reason I cut them flat is because I have this little piece of rustic pallet wood that I want to stand them on, but I want the center one to be a little bit taller. So I'm just using this tumbling tower block and I'm hot gluing it to the back of the wood piece, and that will elevate the middle tree. Before I add the trees, I wanted to get this plank and that tumbling tower block the same color. So I'm using a wash of water and burnt umber acrylic paint. I'm just going to brush it on and the palette wood will soak it up really nicely. I had to give the little tumbling tower block a couple of coats and actually even just dry brush a little bit of the burnt umber directly from the jar. So remember when I said at the beginning of this project that things are going to evolve? This is what I meant. I didn't like the natural wood look. Now that I had stained the plank that they're going to sit on, I wanted everything to look really put together. So I'm just taking a very small brush and some of the same stain that I used on the wood plank, and I'm just going to very gently and carefully go around all of the natural wood pieces of the trees. Everything's dry, so now I can start assembling my little project. I'm using hot glue and I'm just going to be pressing each of the little trees down onto the wood plank. This is the green one that has the cute little pipberry wreath, and I thought that would be a good one to have in the center because it has a chenille stem and the other two have gingham ribbon bows. The other two trees are going to go on the plank itself, and I just got them sticking out a little bit, about a half an inch past the end of the wood plank and sort of in the middle of the wood plank. So there's a little bit of a lip in front of them. I'm going to add some little pine sprigs and some more pine cones and really dress up this little guy so he looks absolutely adorable. I even added a couple of red pipberries just to bring everything together. I think this turned out really sweet. Thank you so much to my current subscribers. I really love you guys. You have helped me grow from nothing to something, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'd love for you to stick around by hitting that red subscribe button too. This first project was suggested by Monica. She wanted to see snowmen. So I'm taking two of these old ornaments that I have and I'm giving them one coat of DIY chalk paint in white. While I waited for those to dry, I decided to mix up some of my white paint with baking soda. I wanted this snowman to have some really nice texture, so I'm adding probably almost the same amount, equal parts, maybe just a little bit less of the baking soda. I'm just going to keep stirring it up and add a little bit of water if it gets too thick. I'm using a pretty hefty stippling brush because I want to be able to create even more texture by just pouncing the paint right onto the snowballs. And you can see how cute it looks already. This brush tended to be a little bit too big. It was grabbing too much paint. So for my second coat, I went and switched over to the stencil brush from the Dollar Tree. I just love white and black buffalo check, and I have this piece of fat quarter. It's a flannel piece, and I picked this up at Walmart a while ago. What I'm going to do is just take my hot glue and make a couple of hems. I'm going to flip up the end of this one time and go all the way across with it. Then I'm going to do it one more time, and that's going to create a little cuff for the hat. Be careful when you're using hot glue and fabric. It does get pretty warm. Now, this flannel is fairly thick, so I didn't have a problem with that, but you can see me just kind of tapping it with my finger. I'm using one of the smaller ornaments just as a guide so I know where to cut this fabric for my snowman's hat. I flipped the fabric over so the hemmed portion is on the outside, and I'm just adding a little bit of hot glue to the one side, and then I'm going to just press them together to make a tube. Then I'll glue the remainder of the hem together. Using some gingham ribbon, I'm going to just tie off the hat about halfway up and just give it a really good tight knot. Then I'm going to cut the top part of the hat into 1/4 inch strips just so it has a little bit more of a fun look to it. Cutting these pieces will kind of make the top part of the hat flop over a little bit. It'll turn out really cute. I cut off the ends of the gingham ribbon and now I'm just going to glue them together to form a loop, and then I'll hot glue it on the gingham ribbon that's already tied just to create a cute little bow. I grabbed 3 little buttons from my sewing kit and I put them on a piece of painter's tape, and I'm just going to paint them black. Those are, of course, are going to be the buttons for his belly. I got these little glass containers from my cousins Walt and Lucia. Lucia, if you're watching, thank you so much. I finally found a use for one of them, but I've got 3 more to use, so stay tuned. I needed something at the bottom of the container that would support the snowman a little bit better, so I'm just putting in a tumbling tower block with my Weld Bond glue. I haven't had much luck painting little glass pieces where the paint stays on. Same with my canisters. So most of the time I use the spray sealer, but this time I thought I would try some Mod Podge because I think the majority of you probably have more access to Mod Podge than a spray sealer. I'm going to give it a nice coat all the way around, let it dry completely, and then I'm going to go over it with my black chalk paint. Once the Mod Podge is dry, I'm going to go ahead and paint over it in my black. I'm going sort of an up and down motion for this one. When I do my second coat, I'm going to go across, and that is going to give me some really good coverage on my paint. It's going to fill in any of the little gaps that might have been missed the first time around. The snowman is dry, so now it's time to assemble them. And these two are going to fit really perfectly, one right inside the other. So I put some hot glue on the top of the snowman, so basically his head, and I pushed that right inside the opening of the bottom ornament. Now I had to hold this very gently because these two are plastic and the hot glue did start to melt it a little bit. So I pulled it out and kind of let the hot glue dry a little bit more as you saw me doing there. And now I'm just going to hold it in place until it dries completely. My little snowman needed some eyes, so I just grabbed 2 of these gems and painted them black too. For his cute little nose, I found this red pipberry was the perfect shape and size. I'm painting it with my honey brown chalk paint because this is the best rustic orange color. I don't like the bright oranges, so I'm going to give this one coat and then let it dry as well. So here comes the best part, assembling my little snowman. I'm going to add just a little bit of hot glue and put his hat on a little bit kittywampus, a little tilted to one side. I just think that makes him look extra cute. I just used some hot glue and put on his little eyes and nose, and now I'm just going to do the same with his buttons. He wouldn't be a snowman without a scarf, so I'm going to take another strip of that flannel fabric, glue it together, but leave about 3 inches on each end because I want the end part of the scarf to be kind of floppy and move around. So I'm just going to hem it down like I did with his little hat, just with some hot glue. I have to be super careful with the amount of hot glue that I put on these ornaments. So I'm just starting off with little bits here and there. I'm going to just put it on the side of his little head there and then glue the part of the scarf on. Then I'll just continue to wrap it all the way around, gluing in a few spots as I go. Once I got around to the front, I glued the one loose end of his scarf a little bit down so it would kind of hang down. So you can see me here, I'm kind of folding it over, making a little pinch there, and then just holding it in place to dry. Then I'll do the same thing for the other end of the scarf. I've trimmed off the excess and now what I'm going to do is fray the ends. I love doing this to little scarves and stuff like that because it just makes it look more realistic. So all you do is just grab some of the threads and start pulling, and you can do this for as much or as little of the scarf as you want. My snowman needs a cute little mouth, so I'm just going to use a fine tip Sharpie and create a mouth just by drawing it on. I'm going to start by the little sort of half circle or half moon shapes here for his cheeks, and then I'm going to connect the two with a sweet little mouth. Using a white marker, I'm just going to give his eyes some highlights too. I added an extra button to the center of the bow on top. I just thought that would be really cute. Then I thought his hat looked a little too tall, so I just took some hot glue and glued the fabric down onto itself, just pulling it over to the side a bit. Using some weld bond glue on the bottom of the ornament, I'm going to go ahead and glue him onto the tumbling tower block. I did need to add a little bit of hot glue just to secure him in place a little bit better. I decided to add some little arms just with some bamboo skewers, and now I'm just going to dry brush and distress that glass container, make him look a little bit more vintagey. Monica, I hope you love him as much as I do. If you do, let me know in the comments below and we'll connect so I can get your address and ship him to you just in time for Christmas. This project is for Charlene. She suggested I do something with angels. So I have a whole bunch of these Christmas tree forms left over. They're wood, they were from Michael's. And I got the idea to create some angels out of them. So I'm going to be trimming off 2 of the branch areas, and then I'm going to cut it all the way across, round out the corners, and I end up with the body of an angel. And I think this is absolutely adorable. These wood pieces were thin enough that I could just use my utility knife and make sure that I could score it a few times and then take my needle nose pliers and just give it a snap. And that was just really helpful in getting the pieces off. I'm just going to use some hot glue to glue these 2 pieces together. To fill in the gaps on the sides, I'm just using some hot glue and I'm taking one of these Dollar Tree scoring tools and just kind of pressing the glue into the creases. And that's just a real simple way of being able to fill things up. You can also use some spackling or some dry decks spackle that I'm going to be using shortly, but I just thought this might be another way that is a little bit faster and easier to do. My angel needed a neck. So I'm taking this 1/2 inch dowel and I'm just cutting it with my miter shears just to get a little neck piece. I'm going to hot glue that on the top of the body and then I'll attach her head. This is a doll head that I picked up at Michael's in a bag. I think there were 5 or 6. This is the last one I have left, and it's the perfect head for my angel. I glued on 2 little wood beads for her hands. And of course, an angel needs wings. So I'm taking these wood stars that I have, got a bunch of them as well. And I thought I'm going to use what I have. I'm just going to be tracing out this original one that I made already. And I'm going to then show you how I created an angel wing out of this star. So I'm just going to trim off the excess points that I don't need and then round off the top. I sanded down the edges to make everything smooth, and now I'm just going to hot glue the wings onto the back of the angel. I'm using a pencil to mark where I want them to be. I'm using some of the dry deck spackling to create some texture on the wings. I wanted them to look kind of fluffy, but I didn't want to use any fabric or anything. I wanted this still to be quite rustic. I'm putting it on with the consistency probably of a thin icing, and then I'll just use the popsicle stick to add more texture. I also added some texture just to the bottom portion of her skirt. So I'm putting on the spackling again, just like some icing. And then I'm going to just take my popsicle stick and create some lines that'll just show up when I distress her later. I'm going to paint all of the body and the wings with the baking soda mixture that I created for the snowman. This is just going to add some extra texture. I've let it dry completely and now I'm going to do some distressing. This is some silver acrylic paint and I'm just very gently going to dry brush her wings and the bottom of her skirt, just where I put the spackling and added the texture. And this is just going to bring out a lot of the details on the wings and her skirt. I'm going to glue 2 tumbling tower blocks, one to the front and one to the back, and that's going to help her stand up a lot better. I'm going to glue the angel onto this rustic piece of wood slice. It has live edge on either sides. Then I'm going to add a bunch of bottle brush trees and some pine cones and a couple of the Dollar Tree white and sparkly trees. And I think this turned out absolutely beautiful. Charlene, if you're watching and you'd like me to send you this beautiful rustic angel, I would be happy to do so. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed these Christmas projects and got some inspiration to start thinking about what you would like to create for your home for the Christmas season. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.